The first thing I noticed when I got back from my 2-week trip to Montana was that my mailbox was gone, not vandalized, not knocked over, just gone, post and all. Like it had been surgically removed from the ground by someone who had way too much time and zero business touching my property. I stood there in the blazing afternoon sun, duffel bag still slung over my shoulder, staring at the empty patch of dirt where my mailbox used to be. My name's Vaughn, and I've lived in the Ashwood Knoll subdivision for 11 years. Quiet neighborhood, mix of retirees and young families. It was all good until the HOA got a new president. Her name was Zandra. Mid-50s, fake blonde bob, always in a floral blouse that screamed, "I'm in charge." She stormed into the HOA like she was running for mayor of a town no one wanted to live in. Ever since she took over, the rules were getting out of hand, measuring grass height with a ruler, handing out fines for aggressively colored flowers, and now, apparently, stealing mailboxes. I headed straight to her house. Of course, she lived in the biggest one on the block, with that tacky lion statue by the porch. I knocked. Hard, she opened the door with that tight, pinched face of hers, like she was already annoyed by my existence. "Zandra," I said, stepping back just enough not to get accused of anything. "Where the hell is my mailbox?" she blinked. "Oh, Vaughn, I had it removed while you were away. It didn't meet HOA standards." I nearly laughed. "You what?" It was tilted, the paint was chipped, and it was 3 inches taller than the regulation height. "I sent you a notice." I was in Montana. "You knew that?" "Well, that's not my responsibility. We have aesthetic guidelines to uphold. I had it removed and discarded, like it was her property to begin with. You had no right to touch my property." She folded her arms. "Actually, the HOA charter gives the board authority to enforce compliance. You touched a federally protected mailbox, Zandra. That's not HOA territory." That's when her face twitched, just for a second. She recovered fast, but I saw it. She didn't know, or she thought I wouldn't. I turned and walked off. "You just made a federal mistake," she called after me. "You better replace it with an approved one or you'll be fined." I didn't respond. I had a better idea. Next morning, I visited the local post office. I spoke directly with the postmaster, a no-nonsense woman named Carla who looked like she'd punched her way through more than one bureaucratic wall. I explained what happened, showed her photos of the missing mailbox, the dirt patch, and the HOA's last newsletter with Zandra's name plastered over every page like a campaign ad. Carla exhaled slowly. She removed it herself, personally ordered it. "Admitted it to me yesterday morning," she nodded. "Interfering with mail delivery or tampering with a mailbox is a federal offense. I'll have someone over this afternoon." By that evening, a USPS inspector was walking the neighborhood with me, clipboard in hand. We stopped in front of Zandra's house. She was in her garden, pruning roses like she didn't have a care in the world. "Miss Rell," the inspector said, "we need to speak with you about a complaint involving tampering with a mailbox." She froze mid-snip. That tight pinched look again, but this time her hands were shaking. "I'm with the HOA. We're allowed to enforce," the inspector cut her off. "HOA rules do not override federal law. Removing a mailbox without the homeowner's consent is a violation of Title 18 United States Code, Section 1705. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. I just stood there, arms crossed, letting the silence bury her, and that was just the beginning. Zandra didn't say a word as the USPS inspector handed her a printed notice, pointedly highlighting a line with her pen. I didn't need to read it. I was already familiar with the consequences of tampering with federal property. She wasn't getting fined by the HOA this time. She was dealing with Washington. The inspector turned to me. "We'll file a formal report. If she contests the facts, we have procedures. But this is a cut and dry violation. You'll be contacted if the case moves forward." Zandra's face had gone a shade lighter than her hydrangeas. She made a tiny choking noise and turned away without another word, pruning shears dangling in her hand like a forgotten toy. I went home and installed a new mailbox, one that met every federal and postal guideline but was painted a bold, unapologetic orange. I wasn't trying to be subtle anymore. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of clattering metal. I looked out the window and saw a man in a neon yellow vest crouched in front of my new mailbox, tape measure in hand. I walked outside in bare feet, coffee in hand. "Morning," I said. "You with the city?" He stood up slowly. The vest read Ashwood Knoll HOA compliance. "No, sir," he said. "Just verifying mailbox specs, routine inspection. Got a name?" "Greg." "Greg," I said, taking a sip of coffee. "You planning on touching it?" He hesitated. "Only measuring." I pointed at the side of the mailbox. "See that sticker? USPS approved, already cleared. Anything else you do is tampering." Greg stepped back like the mailbox might bite him. "Understood, just following instructions." "Whose instructions?" He looked over his shoulder. "Mrs. Rell said we needed to confirm compliance with newly ratified standards." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was so clumsy. "Did these new standards pop up yesterday?" He didn't answer. Just mumbled something about updated documentation and walked off, clipboard tucked under his arm like a tail between his legs. I watched him shuffle across the street and knock on the door of my neighbor, Lorna Patel. She answered wearing a robe and a mud face mask, clearly not thrilled. I watched her eyebrows rise higher and higher as Greg spoke. Then she pointed directly at my house. She showed up at my door less than 15 minutes later. "What is going on?" she asked, wiping her face mask off with a pink towel. "You mean Greg?" "I mean Zandra. She's claiming we all have to replace our mailboxes by next Friday or we'll be fined." "Didn't she approve the last set of standards 3 months ago?" "Exactly. And we all paid to meet those. Now she's saying the board voted again while you were gone." I led her to my garage and pulled open a drawer. Inside was a folder labeled HOA correspondence. I'd been keeping meticulous records for years out of habit. My dad was a property lawyer, and the habit stuck. I flipped to the last approved amendment. It had Zandra's signature and date. Nowhere did it mention another pending vote. No revisions, no pending clauses, just a finalized list of cosmetic guidelines. Lorna scanned it and whistled. "You think she's faking board votes?" "I think she's rewriting the rules and hoping no one notices." By late afternoon, I had 7 neighbors in my living room, each with a letter from the HOA citing a new mailbox compliance deadline. All were dated 2 days before I returned from Montana. All were signed by Zandra. None had vote documentation, minutes, or board approval notes attached. "I'm not paying another cent," said Jim, a retired firefighter. "My wife picked that thing out of a catalog. She painted it herself." "She told me mine was too severe," said Claudia, a single mom who worked nights at the hospital. "It's a black mailbox. What does that even mean?" I stood up. "We need to see the board minutes. If she's forging compliance votes, it's fraud." "We can request an emergency transparency review." "We've tried that before," said Lorna. "She always says the records are in process or under revision." "We won't ask," I said. "We'll demand." The next day, we called a special meeting. According to the HOA bylaws, if 10 or more homeowners signed a petition, the board was required to hold a review session within 72 hours. We had 12 signatures within 30 minutes. I hand-delivered the letter to Zandra's door. She opened it just enough to take the envelope, then shut it before I could say anything. 3 days later, we gathered in the community clubhouse. Zandra arrived with her usual clipboard, flanked by 2 board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Her smile was strained, but she still tried to act like she was in control. "We'll begin with roll call," she said, tapping the table. I raised my hand. "Before that, I'd like to invoke subsection 9 of the HOA Charter. We're requesting a full review of the mailbox amendment process, including vote tallies, meeting minutes, and board member input records." Zandra blinked. "That's outside the scope of this meeting." "No, it's not," said Lorna, holding up a printed copy of the bylaws. Subsection 9 allows for document review during any official meeting if quorum is present. Zandra looked like she'd bitten into a lemon. The records are currently being digitized. They're not available at this time. Then we'll wait, I said. We're in no rush. The room went quiet. Someone coughed awkwardly. Her two bored allies wouldn't meet her eyes. I'm not obligated to provide them on demand, she said. Yes, you are, said Jim, who had joined me at the front. You're obligated to maintain transparency, and failure to provide records upon formal request within 5 business days is a breach of fiduciary duty. She opened her mouth, but before she could respond, the door opened. Carla, the postmaster, walked in. I hope I'm not late, she said. I was invited by Mr. Newell. I brought a copy of the federal complaint regarding the mailbox removal incident in case anyone needs clarification. Zandra's face twitched again, that same little tremor I'd seen before. I think it's best we reschedule, she said, already gathering her papers. You reschedule, I said. We'll be here, going through each amendment you pushed without a recorded vote. The room erupted in quiet murmurs. Even her allies looked uncomfortable now, and then something strange happened. One of them, Tom, a soft-spoken retired engineer, stood up and said, I never voted on a second mailbox amendment. Zandra froze. I remember approving the first one, but I was never informed of a second vote. Claudia raised her hand. That makes 2 board members who didn't vote. Who did approve it? Zandra didn't answer. I took a step forward. If you forged a board vote, that's criminal fraud. We're not talking about fines anymore. We're talking about charges. Carla nodded slowly. And if you used that forged vote to justify tampering with federal property, that could make things worse. Zandra's hand trembled as she tried to shove papers into her bag. Her keys clattered to the ground. We didn't stop her from leaving. We didn't need to. By the end of the week, she'd resigned for personal reasons. The board was forced to hold a new election. We voted in people who actually lived in the real world. And just for good measure, we added an amendment. The HOA could no longer modify rules without full public disclosure and a mandatory 30-day comment period. And the orange mailbox, it stayed. The week after Zandra resigned, the neighborhood felt like it had exhaled for the first time in months. Lawns weren't being measured. People put out garden gnomes again. Kids chalked up the sidewalks without someone hounding their parents about visual clutter. But the peace didn't last more than 5 days. It started with a quiet knock at my door one morning, not the kind of knock you associate with neighbors or delivery drivers. This one was deliberate, calculated. I opened it to find a man in a navy suit standing on my porch, badge clipped to his belt. Mr. Vaughn Newell, he asked. His tone was formal but not unfriendly. That's me. Detective Hal Morris, County Financial Crimes Division. Mind if I come in? I stepped aside, already feeling a churn in my gut. He waited until we sat at my kitchen table before he pulled out a thin folder. We've been investigating multiple complaints involving the Ashwood Knoll HOA. I understand you were involved in filing a petition that led to your former president stepping down. I nodded. That's right. Mailbox incident. Then we uncovered some forged vote documentation. He tapped the folder. That's what got our attention, but that wasn't the first red flag. What was? 3 months ago, a resident from a nearby subdivision submitted a complaint about wrongful foreclosure proceedings tied to a lien placed by this HOA. Our records show the property wasn't even under their jurisdiction. My brow furrowed. You're telling me Zandra tried to foreclose on a home outside our neighborhood? Not tried, filed paperwork. The county clerk flagged it. That's when we started watching. I leaned back in my chair. What do you need from me? Any records you kept from HOA meetings? Emails, newsletters, notices. Anything with signatures, especially those relating to votes or financial decisions. I opened my old laptop and pulled up the archive where I'd scanned every letter and memo I'd ever received from the HOA over the years. As it turned out, my habit of keeping everything had just become evidence in a felony case. By the time the detective left, He had a full USB drive and a signed affidavit from me confirming the document's authenticity. 2 days later, a white van pulled into the clubhouse parking lot. County investigators unloaded boxes, rolled in carts, and sealed off the doors. A paper notice was taped to the entrance. By order of the county sheriff, property seized pending investigation. The news spread fast. People gathered on sidewalks, watching the scene unfold. I knew something smelled off when she charged us for the new security gate and never installed it, said Mrs. Ellison, who lived across the street from the clubhouse. She told us the funds were delayed, someone else muttered. No, I said. She told us the contractor backed out. Then she told the board the parts were on backorder. Then she told me the city denied the permit. None of those stories matched. By evening, the local paper had broken the story. The headline read, "Former HOA President under investigation for fraud, forgery, and embezzlement." The article laid out the details. Zandra had been funneling HOA funds into a private business account registered under her sister's name. That account had been used to purchase everything from catering for non-existent events to a second vehicle registered in another county. The total, just over $64,000. But that wasn't the worst of it. That same week, an attorney named Dana Corwin contacted me. She represented a group of residents from a nearby neighborhood, Evergreen Ridge, about 15 minutes east. They'd been hit with sudden lien notices and threatened fines from what they thought was their own HOA. Turns out, it was forged documentation using Ashwood Knowles letterhead. "You're saying she impersonated our HOA to go after people in other neighborhoods?" I asked her over the phone. "She didn't just impersonate," Dana said. "She created fake subdivisions, registered phony HOAs with the county using shell names, then sent out letters demanding dues, threatening liens, and in 2 cases actually succeeded in forcing payment. We have court filings ready." I sat there, stunned. Why would anyone pay a fake HOA? Same reason people fall for IRS phone scams. Fear. She used legal language, cited real laws, and threatened court action. Most people don't know what an HOA can and can't legally do. I gave her everything I had: the newsletters, the altered amendment notices, even the audio recording I had taken during the emergency meeting where Tom admitted there was never a second vote. A week later, Detective Morris returned. "Do you have time to come down to the station?" he asked. "What for?" "Well, we'd like you to attend the preliminary hearing. You're on the list of material witnesses, and your documentation helped us get the warrant." I showed up at the courthouse the next morning wearing the one suit I owned, the same one I wore to my cousin's wedding and a funeral the year before. The courtroom buzzed with quiet tension. Zandra sat at the defense table, her once perfectly coiffed hair now a limp mess of curls, her blazer wrinkled and too tight. Her attorney stood up and requested a continuance. The judge denied it. Then the county prosecutor laid it out: fraudulent financial activity, forgery of legal documents, impersonation of a legal entity, and federal interference with postal operations. The last one, the mailbox stunt, was the final nail in the coffin, because it wasn't just dumb. It was illegal in a way that couldn't be spun as a misunderstanding. When the prosecutor introduced the scan of the letter Zandra had sent me claiming the mailbox violated HOA federal alignment guidelines, the judge visibly raised an eyebrow. "Is that a real term?" he asked. "No, Your Honor," the prosecutor said. "It's entirely fabricated." The judge leaned back. "And this was used to justify removal of a federally protected mailbox?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And we have an admission from the defendant, recorded by the homeowner and confirmed by a federal postal inspector." Zandra's attorney whispered something to her, but she didn't respond. She just stared ahead, unmoving. The judge ordered her held on bail, citing risk of flight due to the multiple layers of fraud. She was escorted out in cuffs. That night, the neighborhood gathered in the clubhouse reopened and now managed by the interim board. Everyone brought food. Someone even put together a slideshow of ridiculous HOA letters Zandra had sent over the years. My favorite was the one warning about non-regulation solar reflections from garden lights. We laughed harder than we had in months. Toward the end, Tom stood up. "We're not just here to celebrate the end of a bad chapter," he said. "We're here to make sure it never happens again. We've drafted a revised charter. It limits presidential authority, requires third-party audits, and most importantly mandates that all major decisions require full board approval and public notice." Applause filled the room. I stood in the back, arms crossed, watching the people around me reclaim what they'd almost lost. Community, trust, the right to live without being bullied by someone who thought a clipboard made her a queen. Lorna came over holding a paper plate with 3 deviled eggs and a brownie. "You know, I never thought I'd say this, but I kinda owe you." I raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For being a meticulous, mailbox-obsessed maniac. You kept records like a librarian with a grudge," I laughed. "Guess that grudge paid off," she nudged me. "You ever think about running for the board?" I held up my hands. "Absolutely not. I prefer watching from the sidelines." She started to walk away, then turned back. "Still, if you ever change your mind, I'll vote for you." I didn't answer, just nodded once. The orange mailbox still stood tall at the end of my driveway, scratch-free, regulation height, and now, strangely enough, a community landmark. People had started painting theirs brighter too. Not out of rebellion, but solidarity. It was a small thing. But sometimes, a small thing is all it takes to start turning the tide. It had been 3 weeks since Zandra was led out of the county courthouse in handcuffs, and Ashwood Knoll had started breathing like a neighborhood again. The new board was holding meetings that actually involved the residents, and the clubhouse had been transformed from a place of dread into a genuine community space. But for all the progress we'd made, there was one thread that hadn't been pulled yet, and it was starting to tug at me. The HOA's financials, not the forged votes or the mailbox fiasco. The real numbers. Something about them didn't sit right. I'd seen the budgets Zandra published in the quarterly newsletters, and they never quite added up. Not in a flashy way, just subtle enough that most people wouldn't notice. A line item for community improvement planning that stayed the same for 2 years, yet never produced a single visible result. A maintenance budget that ballooned one summer without a single sprinkler head replaced, so I called in a favor. My cousin Amber was an auditor for a private firm that handled compliance checks for small municipalities. She didn't usually touch HOAs, but she owed me for helping her fix up her first house after a plumbing disaster. I invited her over under the pretense of a barbecue, and once the burgers were out of the way, I handed her a USB drive with everything I'd downloaded from the HOA's old website backups. "What am I looking for?" she asked, flipping through the files on her laptop. "Anything that smells off," I said. Zandra was smart, but she wasn't subtle. Amber didn't say much for the next hour. Then she paused, eyes narrowing. "Did you know your HOA has been paying fees to a company called Green Rook Consulting every quarter for the last 3 years?" "Nope." "Never heard of it." "Neither has the IRS." I leaned in. "It's not registered," she said. "No tax ID, no business license, not even a P.O. box that checks out. The address listed on the invoices. It belongs to a shuttered dry cleaner in Midvale, and the payments aren't small. Over $20,000 a year." I felt the cold in my spine before I even stood up. "Can you print that?" she nodded. The next morning, I walked into the office of the newly elected board president, a retired CPA named Marcia Haller, holding a folder thick with highlighted statements. She looked up from her desk. "Please tell me that's not more mailbox drama." "Worse," I said. Zandra wasn't just embezzling, she was laundering funds through a ghost company. Marcia read through the first 2 pages, then set them down slowly. "If this is accurate, we need to report it." "Immediately." "I already made a call to Detective Morris. He's expecting to hear from you." An hour later, a plain car pulled up in front of the clubhouse. Morris stepped out, still dressed like he belonged behind a desk more than in a chase, but his eyes were sharp. "You said you had something new," he said as Marcia and I handed over the folder. He flipped through it, page by page, until he hit a copy of a check authorized by Zandra and countersigned by the former treasurer, her boyfriend. It turned out. "Green Rook," he muttered. "I've seen that name before." "You have?" I asked. He nodded. "We investigated an elder fraud case 2 years ago. Victim in a different county had her savings drained through payments to a fake consulting firm. We never found the source, but the name on those invoices." "Green Rook." Marcia sat down heavily. "You're saying this wasn't just mismanagement, it was part of a larger scheme." Morris closed the folder. "I'm saying your former HOA president might have been operating as part of a fraud ring. And with this level of coordination, it's likely not her first time." By the end of the week, there were federal agents involved. A forensic accounting team came in and combed through years of HOA transactions, digging up more skeletons than anyone expected. Zandra hadn't just funneled money through Green Rook. She'd also used HOA funds to purchase prepaid debit cards, which were then used at luxury boutiques, hotel chains, and even a vacation resort in Belize. The total misappropriated funds surpassed $140,000. The charges were upgraded: wire fraud, conspiracy to commit bank fraud, and money laundering. The federal kind. I sat in the back row of the courtroom when the indictment was read. Zandra looked nothing like the woman who used to scold people about recycling bins left out overnight. Her hair had grown out, grayer than before, and she wore a county-issued jumpsuit that didn't have room for clipboards or smugness. Her lawyer didn't even attempt to argue for bail this time. Marcia and I were called to testify before the grand jury. Amber submitted her findings as an expert report. The evidence was overwhelming. Zandra pled guilty to avoid a trial. At sentencing, the judge didn't mince words. "You used your authority to exploit a community, deceive homeowners, and steal from people who trusted you. You weaponized bureaucracy and cloaked theft in the language of policy. That doesn't just make you corrupt, it makes you dangerous." She was sentenced to 6 years in federal prison, but the real aftermath, that played out back in Ashwood Knoll. The new board didn't just rewrite the charter. They hired an outside firm to audit the HOA annually. They opened all meetings to residents, live streamed for transparency. Every homeowner now had access to financial dashboards showing exactly where every dollar went, and the clubhouse got more use in 2 months than it had in the previous 5 years combined. One Saturday, we held a neighborhood fair. Kids ran through sprinklers, someone set up a dunk tank, and a local band played covers on the lawn. I stood by the grill flipping bratwursts when Marcia came over holding a lemonade. "You were right from the start," she said. "About the mailbox. About everything." "I just wanted my mail back," I said. She smiled. "Well, you gave us a whole lot more than that." Across the street, the orange mailbox stood in the sun, surrounded by others now painted in every color you could imagine: teal, burgundy, even one covered in mosaic tiles. What had started as an act of defiance was now a badge of survival. Lorna walked up, sunglasses perched on her head. "You still refusing to run for the board?" "Absolutely," I said. "I enjoy my weekends." She looked around at the people laughing, talking, grilling, and chasing toddlers through the grass. "Still, you're kind of the reason this place still feels like a neighborhood." "Maybe," I said. "But I think the real reason is that people stopped being afraid to speak up." She raised her cup. "To speaking up." I clinked mine against hers. "And to never letting anyone steal a mailbox again." The wind kicked up just enough to rattle the flags lining the clubhouse entrance. They'd added a new one last week, a navy blue banner with the words "Ashwood Knoll," by the people for the people. It wasn't perfect, it never would be, but it was ours again.